Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Kim Humphrey, and as was noted, my title now currently is Executive Director of Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. And I will say this, when you come up to a stage and you say, hey, I'm from Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, it sort of gives away the punchline, doesn't it? You kind of already have an idea of what's happened in my life and my family's life. But I kind of want to explain a little bit about how PAL kind of came into existence, why we're so excited about what PAL is doing, and how it's expanding around the United States and helping people around this issue that is really devastating our country. I know a lot of you have heard the words opioid crisis, and you've read about it probably, and you're hearing more and more about some of the things that are happening around the country. But I'm not sure how much the average person really understands the extent of this health epidemic. It is by far the largest health epidemic in the history of the United States. So as you think about that, think about this problem. Death by overdose exceeds annual deaths from car crashes, guns, and AIDS, and that will actually be all of them together within the next few years if the numbers continue. In the past, some of those were at very high numbers, and it exceeded any of those at any given time in their history. Drug overdose deaths are the #1 cause of preventable death in the United States. And the opioid epidemic has been declared a national health epidemic, and it's also been declared an epidemic and a health emergency in the state of Arizona and many of the other states in the United States. Of the 20.5 million Americans that are over the age of 12, and that should give you pause right there, that it actually starts at 12, that have a substance use disorder, clear back in 2015, and of course the numbers are significantly higher, they're well over 22 million now, that involved prescription pain relievers. Over 500,000 of them were involving heroin. And of course, most of you remember that heroin was one of those drugs that wasn't really talked about. It was that drug that people did, back in alleys and things like that. And that's obviously no longer the case, because heroin is a direct cousin of prescription painkillers, and so a lot of times it ends up being a direct link from a prescription painkiller to heroin use. So what else about the problem? 7 people every single hour of the day in the United States are dying of an opioid overdose, 24/7, 365. You add in other drugs, and obviously that's going to increase when you start adding in meth, cocaine, and all of the other drugs that are abused. One of the things I always like to point out is we all talk about the opioid crisis, and we realize that the numbers are significant, but the reality is that alcohol kills more than all of the other drugs combined. So if you start looking at that number and adding it to this, you get a significant amount of people that are being affected by substance use disorder. I don't know if you knew this one. If you add all cancers together, all of them, more people are diagnosed with substance use disorder than all people with all cancers. This is an epidemic that is beyond proportion of anything we have ever seen in our history. It's just unprecedented. And so look at Arizona a little bit. Arizona is very active in tracking this. When the governor declared this a health emergency, what it did was it authorized the tracking of the information immediately. So as hospitals and doctors and others are addressing this issue, they are immediately feeding this information into a system that is now being tracked literally up to the minute by the state of Arizona. So as you can see up here, roughly about 9,000 people a year are overdosing just in the state of Arizona. That's 25 every single day, and 4 of those end up being fatal. So, does it just affect the individual that's the one that has the addiction problem? And the answer is clearly no. Their families are suffering, their parents, their coworkers, the community at large. My guess is that if I were to ask everybody in this room, if you either know somebody in your family that has a substance issue, or if you know a friend or somebody else, I'm guessing that the vast majority of this room is going to raise their hand. And you're going to know somebody that's being affected by this issue. And sadly, it's getting to be more and more people, in spite of the fact that they have declared it an emergency, despite of the fact that they're putting all this effort into it, it's continued to rise. And now we're hearing a lot of things about fentanyl and things like that. And most of you who have heard of that, it's a very powerful drug, 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine, was originally designed as an end-of-life drug, and then became much more of a mainstream in the medical profession in hospitals to be used for, very serious pain and injuries. But unfortunately, if you take fentanyl at its purest form, not in the pill, but if you get actually pure fentanyl, you can get a couple of grains of it on your fingers, it'll absorb through your skin and it can kill you. That's how powerful fentanyl is. So they had numerous issues with this with police officers around the country. One of them was literally touched dust on somebody's clothes, and it was pure fentanyl. And when he touched it, within a few minutes he was unconscious, and it took 4 doses of Narcan, which is the antidote for that, to get him back to life. They barely saved his life, and that was literally touching the dust of that on somebody's clothes. That's how powerful that drug is. They've had that drug pop up in small communities where the drug dealers thought they were just going to add it to people's heroin and thinking that, they're going to get them hooked on something new. And they literally have had dozens and dozens of deaths within 2 to 3 days of each other in small communities, because this stuff was way more powerful than they expected. So there's all kinds of things going on with the trends with opioids and other drugs, but the bottom line is that it's affecting our families, it's affecting us as a community, and I know that it's probably affecting you in one way or another. And so PAL is who I'm here representing today, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. And one of the things about PAL that I can honestly say to you is that outside of probably our faith, it was probably the only thing that saved our lives. We literally, my wife and I, when we found out our sons had this issue, it pretty much took everything out of us. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But the reality was, it was hard to find people that understood what we were going through. And the concept behind PAL is that it's parents helping parents. It's really hard to talk to somebody that has not dealt with this. They don't understand it. They don't understand things like, I had a conversation today with somebody, and they said, well, I've got my daughter's in a treatment program and I don't know what to do because my ex-husband says that her problem with heroin and all that stuff, well, that's just something that's a choice, and she could just quit, and she just needs to quit and get a job and she'd get over it. And she says, and I keep trying to tell him she just can't quit. It just doesn't work that way. But when you talk to people that don't understand these drugs and don't understand the powerful nature of how these drugs hijack your brain, then people will go down the road of saying, oh, they're just making a bad choice. They have bad character. Their morals are not good. They just don't know how to make good choices. Well, I'm going to stand up here and tell you that I have 2 sons, and my wife and I have been married for 35 years, and I'm going to tell you something. We raised our sons in a beautiful home with a wonderful experience. There was no trauma. There was no major drama in their lives. There were no problems. They had a wonderful experience growing up. And not only that, but at the end of the day, they will tell you to this day that they are who they are because of the fact that they grew up in a wonderful home. This is not something about people that have kids that don't know right from wrong. I was a police officer for 32 years. I taught my kids right from wrong. They knew it was wrong to take drugs. They knew it was wrong to do those things. But I'll explain a little bit about how they got involved and why that happened, and what I think probably is some of the underlying reasons why this occurs. But PAL focuses on the unique nature of what goes on in a parent-child relationship. And I'm not going to diminish the fact that we might have a friend that's on drugs, and we really want them to get better, and we really hope they get better. But I want to talk about the fact that when it's your child, when it's your son, your daughter, it's your grandson, your granddaughter, you have a connection to them that's different than any other relationship. Any other relationship. Even a spouse relationship is not the same. And parents, when they see this, they are so devastated and they just don't know what to do. They don't know who to go to, and they don't know how to respond to this issue. And so it's so helpful when they can find other people that understand where they're coming from. And one of the troubles is, as a parent, is that you get confused because you want so badly to save your children. You want to help them. And unfortunately, you start learning after a little while that the things you're doing are not helping, they're actually hurting. And so when my sons would come to me and they would be begging and crying and saying, oh my gosh, I don't have any money, and if I just need $50 or I need $25, and if you would just help me, then that would solve this problem or that problem. And at the end of it, you'd go, okay, well, I'll give you the money because, well, they were going to use it, to buy food. They were going to use it to put gas in their car. They were going to use it in some sort of positive way. And then, of course, all I found out later was that they were just using it to buy drugs. And if I was giving them money, it was just giving them one more reason that they could either use my resources for that, or they could turn around and use their resources in that way. And so as you think about it, it becomes really difficult when you're a parent and you're trying to figure out how you can do this with your kids. How do you lovingly deal with this situation? And it's extraordinarily difficult. And as we fought through this and we worked on it, we had to figure out how to do things in a healthy way, because we wanted to not only help our sons, but we wanted to help ourselves. And so as we look into this, what does PAL do and how do they help? Well, first of all, we offer meetings that are free. We do ask that they be over the age of 18, and that any family member can come to our meetings that's dealing with their loved one. It's not for the person that has the addiction, it's for the people that are having to deal with that. And so we have an educational curriculum, so it differentiates it from a lot of other programs out there. We're not just, and I say just meaning it's important to have a support piece to it, but we're not just a support piece. There's an educational component to every meeting, followed by the fact that we focus in on helping one another and supporting each other as we work our way through this issue. And so, interestingly enough, even though our approach is based on the family members and it's there to help the family members, in reality, what we have found is that when parents and family members, when grandparents and others learn healthier ways to deal with their loved one, interestingly enough, many times we see over and over that the loved one gets help too. And so we are in a, that's one of the reasons why Dr. Scott is going to come up and talk about this, is because we see that this is not only helping the family members, but we believe that it's also helping those that have addiction problems. And if we can be a part of that solution for all these things that are going on, that's why we want to be effective as an organization. We want to be able to help families. We want to be able to help our loved ones as well. And so we talk to, in our meetings, we talk about a lot of different things. And so as you look up here, these are some of the things our lessons cover. These were all developed by a licensed substance abuse counselor here in Arizona. And so they're based on, and I'll let Dr. Scott get into more of the details, but they're based on the theories behind addiction and recovery. And so as you look at these, you can see, and you probably recognize some of these things, but a lot of times we don't talk about things like what is delayed emotional growth. And we don't know what that means. We can't figure out why our 27-year-old is acting like a 16-year-old. Why are they behaving like they don't even understand the basics of what a mature adult or somebody at least should be thinking at that age? And the reality is drugs stunt your emotional growth. So if they started taking drugs when they were 16 and they're 26, guess what they are emotionally? 16. And so when we start realizing that that's why they're acting like they are, and then we start understanding that we need to know why do they relapse? What do we do? How do we best support them? How do we do what is going to help them, not hurt them in this process of hopefully getting better? So PAL, the organization, was incorporated in Arizona as a nonprofit in 2015. It was actually started in 2006 here in the Valley, and at that time, when it was started, it was one meeting. It was at a treatment facility, and it was designed by this substance abuse counselor that had been involved in this for years, and he kept seeing a problem when it came specifically to parents. He just kept seeing that consistently the parents, for lack of better terms, in his mind, were making it worse. And so he thought, I've got to do something to try and educate parents to help them to deal with this problem in a different way. So he started putting together the curriculum. He started these, and over time, he continued to work on it from that perspective of how do I deal with this as this thing as continuing to be a problem with parents. How do I deal with this where I can help people understand? I have no idea why that's wanting to go all by itself. But he finally decided after several years that he started seeing that there were more and more people coming, and he needed to do something about it. And so he decided, okay, hey, you've been coming to the meeting for a while. Could you start a meeting on your side of town? Because we don't have any meetings over there, and I'll just teach you how to do it. And it really should just be parents doing this with parents. And so as that started to happen, the next thing you know, there was 2 or 3 meetings in the Valley. And by 2015, there was about a dozen of them in the Valley. And somehow, some way, some women in Indiana saw or heard from somebody in Arizona, and they called up and said, we want to start a meeting in Indiana. What do we do? Well, it was at that time that my wife and I had been facilitating one of those dozen meetings. And we had found PAL a number of years earlier. We had started facilitating one, and I had just retired from the police department, and Mike Speakman was like, okay, I don't know what to do with this. He was the founder of PAL. He goes, I don't know what to do with this. He goes, I'm 70 years old. I'm trying to retire. There's all these people that want this. What do we do? So we formed a board, a volunteer board. We incorporated it as a nonprofit roughly 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago. And since then, it's expanded from that dozen meetings to today in 4 years to 140 meetings in 33 states. That'll be 34 states, I think, next week, and 2 or 3 or 4 more meetings are opening within the next week. There have been almost 28, 29 meetings that have opened since January 1st. So it's started to go faster and faster as the information has grown. This is with no marketing. This is all by word of mouth and with a website. We have not even gone out and proactively attempted to get the word out, but I will share with you some things about how that did happen in the very recent past. So PAL, the organization, is out there. We're a support process for all these different meetings. We're there as a network to provide this structured educational piece to it, to provide all the materials, to train facilitators, to make sure that people are following the curriculum and doing it in the way that we know that it works. And so we recognize that there's a very important thing that happens, and that is that the group is where the power is. The group is where people learn how to deal with this by learning from one another's experiences. And so it's been extraordinarily helpful. We don't tell anybody what to do. If you came to our meeting and you expect somebody to tell you what to do, you're going to get suggestions if you ask for it. And if you don't want any suggestions and you just want to listen and you want to hear what other people have to say, well, then you can do that too. Because you're going to have to figure this out on your own. Because here's the thing about this group and other groups, it's pretty much a life and death thing all the time. We deal with it all the time. We have people come to our meeting and their loved one overdoses and dies. And it happens. And so we have to figure out how do you deal with people when you're trying to say, well, I think maybe you ought to set a boundary. And what if they set a boundary and 5 minutes later their loved one is no longer around because they killed themselves or they accidentally overdosed or something? Can you imagine? So we have to be very careful about, we're there for support. We need to let people make their own decisions. So we don't tell people what to do. But when they're in a room with people that have been there and know what they're going through, they're a lot more likely to take suggestions from others that have been successful in things they've done. And so we support people regardless of what they decide to do or not to. And we learn from others. And I am so thankful that other people were willing to come to a meeting and share their experience with me, because I didn't know who to ask. I didn't know who to turn to. I can tell you that I had good friends. We had good friends that we had known for years. They had 2 sons the same age as ours. And you know what his wife said to us one day when we were at dinner? She said, we were trying to explain to him all these things that had happened, and she says, yeah, well, I don't understand that because my husband would have just kicked their butts if they would have done that. And I was like, oh, that's all you have to do? You just have to discipline them and they just won't do drugs? Yeah, I wish I would have thought of that one. Yeah, I think that was very helpful. And I think the unfortunate thing is there's a lot of people that just don't understand it. And when you're talking to them, they just looked at us like we were crazy. Why don't you just tell them stop doing it and they'll stop doing it? It's like, that doesn't work. That's not how it works. And so when you're around other people, you understand. So let me introduce you to my family. This is my wife, Michelle, many, many years ago. So she's even more beautiful now because she's up front here. But you'll see our youngest son, Andrew, there, our older son, Sean. They look like they're totally in trauma and got all kinds of problems, right? I mean, we look like a pretty messed up family right from the get-go, don't we? So as the years go by, you think they're a good-looking group of people? I do. You know, I mean, they were just a wonderful kids. They weren't having problems in school. They weren't in trouble. They were doing really well. And so as they grow up, my older son right there, he looks great, doesn't he? I think he does. But he was 15. And when he was 15, we were sitting in the living room one day when a phone rang, and my wife answered the phone, and he was in the other room. The younger one was doing something in his room. And this woman said, hey, my daughter goes to school with your son, and I don't know what to tell you or how to tell you this, but here's the thing. I'm just going to say it. My daughter and her friends are very concerned that your son is going to overdose. What? Yeah, that he's taking prescription painkillers, and they think he's going to overdose. I was sitting there. Here's what my wife said. You called the wrong house. It's not our son's. She says, no, it's him, it's Sean. She said, no, you have the wrong house. She says, well, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but they're very worried. Now let me explain something. Nobody called us and said he's smoking out back. Nobody called us and said he's smoking marijuana. Nobody called us and said, oh, there's some little problem. The first words, the first time I ever hear anything that I heard is a problem is, he might die of an overdose. And so as you start thinking about that, and I'm going to turn this over in 1 second to Dr. Scott, is as we started to deal with this, and we went through bringing him in and finally saying, we want a drug test from you, and he didn't want to give it to us, then I knew we had a problem. And then when we finally got it from him and we found out that he tested positive for opioids, then began the journey. And unfortunately, it just began to spiral out of control, and it got worse and worse and worse. And it eventually led to some pretty dark places. When I started getting phone calls when he was living in the bushes in parks. When I started getting phone calls from hospitals and he was there and he had overdosed. When I started getting all kinds of information from other people saying they're pretty sure our son is dealing drugs now. When he started getting arrested. And then one day when our younger son, who, by the way, he was doing great, and he went off to community college, and he was in a program for mechanical engineering, and he was in that for 2 years. And then one day, all of a sudden, he drops out of school, and the next thing we know, we find out he's out with his brother. I don't even know what to say. We're either the most awful parents on the face of this planet or something, because we don't know what we did or how this happened. But I'm going to tell you, it got worse, and it got worse, and it got worse. And so as we talk about this, I'm hoping we can get into understanding a little bit about that. And as this is the last thing I want to share with you before I turn it over. And my wife, during all of this, we ended up seeing a counselor, and a counselor said, you know what you need to do? You need to start making a journal. You need to write these things down to remind yourself of what's going on and to remind yourself of what your feelings are and what you're going through. And so let me just share a couple little excerpts here from a number of years ago. My wife wrote, I saw Sean again on Sunday. I could not say no to picking him up for church. So I decided we would have a face-to-face conversation and tell him not to contact us until he was ready for recovery. We told him we were not coming to get him again for church, at which point he pointed out the track marks and bruises on his arms. The reality of the seriousness of his addiction nearly paralyzed me. For some reason, he wants me to see the marks on his arm. I was in so much pain, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Here's another one from a different day. My heart sinks as I write these words. We are both in so much pain. Kim is doing better than I am. I believe that Sean knows he is loved. Pulling away from him somehow feels like we are pushing him into making a bad decision, such as ending his life. Our prayer is for motivation to get help, for survival, so that he might live. Here's another one on a different day. So Sean sent a painful Facebook message, and 2 nights ago I was on Facebook and Sean had posted a photo of himself. All of a sudden, over the past few weeks, he has computer access and is online regularly on Facebook. The photo he sent me put me into an anxiety attack and shame attack. He looks like an AIDS patient. He has lost weight, his skin is gray, and he looks sad and desperate and tired. I cried myself to sleep. I showed Kim and he stayed up all night, unable to sleep after looking at the photo. I cried for most of the next day before I went to bed. After seeing the photo, I wrote a comment to Sean under the photo. I love you, Sean, and I miss you. And then I deactivated my Facebook account. So I want to turn this over and I'll come back in a little bit, but I want you to hear from Dr. Scott about why we're so excited about PAL. And I want to share with you some things about how PAL helped us in dealing with this and being able to just come back from where we were and how we were handling this. So with that, I think if you want to take it over, it's all yours.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having Kim and I here. Actually, Kim, when I first met him, he was Commander Humphrey to me. I'm also from law enforcement. And I've known Kim and Michelle for, coming up on 20 years. It's been a long time. They are 2 of the kindest, most loving people I've ever met. Anyone come from military or hierarchical organizations where it's, chain of command? Okay. I was a detective. Okay, let me tell you how this works. Detective's at the bottom, then you go sergeant, then you go lieutenant, then you go commander. So which means to have a commander to be kind and friendly and human is very odd. And he was from day one, and Michelle was the same. So fast forward, I actually transitioned. I spent most of my time in law enforcement and undercover narcotics. And I saw the impact of drugs. I saw what good people out on the streets who wanted help. They really did. But they were paralyzed by addiction. I also, like most of the people here, have family members who have struggled, lifelong struggles with addiction. So when I left the police department and went over to NAU, I run the Justice Studies program, which is like criminal justice, more of an ethical component. And then I knew a little bit about Kim and Michelle's struggles with their sons, just from the contact we maintained over the years, even after I left the department. Again, because Kim, even though he was a commander, just a good person. And then fast forward several more years, and Kim had shared PAL. And he talked about all the stories, and he talked about all the hope that he had seen from families. He talked about families who were totally devastated by their loved one's addiction, and they were able to find hope. They were able to find happiness. They were able to have some mentally they were able to improve. And he said it was phenomenal. He goes, he's telling me the stories, some of the stories he shared at the beginning with everyone here. So he asked if I could evaluate the program. So I brought in a colleague of mine who, Kristen, she was not able to be here tonight, and her background's in behavioral health. So together, we put together an evaluation project to evaluate the effectiveness of PAL. Now, who's students here? Who's a student? Okay, great. So if you have no research, you have nothing, you have someone who's telling you all these stories of anecdotal evidence, right? Things that they've experienced, stories that they've heard. The first thing you have to do is start small. So let's try to test some of these things. Let's try to see if, we're getting some positive results. And that's exactly what we did. So this actually started back in 2017. So we've been at this for around a year and a half. So there's 2 parts. two parts to this. First is we want to look at the curriculum. Because if you don't have a curriculum that's based on evidence-based practices, the curriculum's not good, right? Then it doesn't matter if they're teaching the curriculum to everyone, they're teaching something poorly to everyone the same way. So again, that's Kristen's background. So she looked at the curriculum. Let's see if this is based on evidence-based practices. Is PAL teaching things that they should be teaching to get the results that they want to achieve? The answer was yes. Let's look at the organizational structure. Let's make sure that PAL is training everyone. Again, this is peer-to-peer, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's make sure that everyone is being trained according to the evidence-based practices. So we're not doing that, then again, we're not helping everyone how we need to help them. That would be another, shortcoming of the program. It was. I have to tell you, Kim is one of the most organized people I've ever met. What he has done with PAL in this relatively short period of time is nothing less than remarkable. He has built this organization. If you see the organizational chart, it is unbelievable. You would think it was something from the military or law enforcement. It is that detailed. There is not anything that was left to chance. And it is because of these details that PAL has been able to succeed. So one of the questions that Chris and I also wanted to look at was we hear the stories from Kim, and I would do anything to help Kim and Michelle. So he just has to ask, but beyond that, how big is the scope of this problem? How important it is PAL? Okay. Does addiction stop when somebody's 18? No, all of a sudden, if somebody's 18, all of a sudden the parents no longer are involved, care, consumed by their child's addiction? Absolutely not, right? But yet most of the research that you'll notice, that you'll see out there, is focused on juveniles. Juvenile addicts, parents of juvenile addicts. So you have this group of parents, loved parents, parents who love their children, and they're hopeless. They need support too, so they can support their addicted loved one. And the resources aren't out there. So PAL's feeling a need. Number two, again, Kim and I came from law enforcement, and in my years in narcotics, we would, investigate drug-related crimes, even on the street. If you're in patrol, you go out to a house, you're for a family fight, and you happen to see, the 30-year-old who's, high on meth, and, family fight, they're causing all this strife. Police department, you try to separate everyone if there's not a crime and so forth, but now these parents are left still with this addicted loved one. Is there any support given to them? Police, we come, we investigate the crime, we put a Band-Aid on it. If there's no one to take to jail, we leave. But PAL, if this is an effective program, law enforcement has another tool. Remember, law enforcement, we're there to help the community, not just to solve a crime. We want to help. So this is filling a void in the community for law enforcement and families. So Kristen and I were all in. If this is as effective as Kim was experiencing, then we have something wonderful for the community. So all my students out here, the first thing you start with are the research questions, right? So what do you want to find out? If you're going to conduct evaluation research, you have to start from the beginning. What do you want to answer? So it started obviously with Kim and doing some other research and talking to some other people internally within PAL. What are your goals? PAL's main goals were, number one, we have evidence-based curriculum, okay? Number two, that we help members, their members, which the PAL, people who participate in PAL, those are called members. The PAL members, we help their mental and physical well-being improve. And then also we give parents the tools to help support their addicted loved one find recovery. And again, these tools are based on evidence-based practices. So then our job as researchers was to find out if these things were happening. So again, we started small, reviewing the PAL curriculum. And again, Kim went over this during his initial presentation. Kristen found out that it was based on evidence-based practices. So everything that PAL said it wanted to do, the curriculum was designed to obtain this goal. So now we're good, we checked that box off, right? We have the organizational structure, we have a solid curriculum. So now let's see if the members are actually getting out of it what they need to get out of it. Is the delivery working? again, we have to start small because there hasn't been anything done before with PAL. So I started with interviews. And again, small number of interviews, people that Kim was able to refer me to that have participated in PAL. And every single thing that Kim said was echoed. It was the most moving thing I have ever participated in my life. Hearing the stories from the parents, and in one case, two parents, husband and wife, their daughter was an addict and their granddaughter was an addict. And the stories they told about being at totally rock bottom, they've given everything emotionally, everything financially, they've done everything they possibly could do. They've gone across the country to try to save their daughter. They've gone across the country to try to save their granddaughter. They've done everything, and nothing has worked. And they were totally destroyed. I was interviewing a couple again, and the father's in tears, crying. It is so devastating. But PAL gave them hope. They gave them hope. They gave them light in the dark. They gave them hope for the hopeless. And with that, they found a resource of support for them. So, God willing, their loved one did find sobriety, but what we'll find out is that that is a little bit out of the control of the parent. But at least PAL was achieving its goal. It was improving the members' well-being. So now we had a solid start. I also had the opportunity to interview 2 recovered addicts whose parents had attended PAL. Again, triangulation from my students. So we're not just going to use one method and call it a day. We're going to try a couple of different things and see if our results all match, right? So now let's interview the addicts who actually recovered with parents who attended PAL. They said the same thing. They said that it was their parents stopping the enabling, it was their parents stopping the codependency, it was their parents taking these measures that PAL teaches in their program, but this is the key, this is what's interesting. It allowed them to hit their rock bottom. And it was their individual rock bottom. One girl said that she kept going to rehab, she would be high before she hit the parking lot. There was nothing her parents could do. But yet, when the parents started implementing, as difficult as it was, these lessons, then the addict hit their rock bottom, and then they sought recovery, and that was their journey back, which is exactly what PAL's curriculum is based off of. So again, very small sample size, but so far, we're on the right direction. So what's the next step? Do we want to stick with the 6 people that we're talking to and the 2 addicts, or do we want to have a bigger sample size so we can actually generalize some of these results? Exactly, so that's exactly what we did. So we're going to start with quantitative surveys. So we looked at the entire PAL distribution list. So basically anybody who had registered an email address with PAL at any time since its inception. So of course, some of these people are no longer active, but we wanted to be able to survey everyone. We ended up being a little over 3,000 people that we sent surveys out to. Surveys is a SurveyMonkey link. We also put it on Facebook, hoping that maybe we would generate some interest that way. We ended up getting 606 respondents. It's very impressive, very solid number. We wanted to gather some demographic data. Again, PAL hadn't been researched before, so we really wanted to get an idea of the people who are served by PAL. So that will help PAL also to, if necessary, to modify their program, to hone their program, give them some good feedback to be able to make the program as good as can possibly be. So most of the respondents were female. And also, and this should be no surprise to anyone, again, we're looking at adult addicts, right? If you look at adults, the parents are going to be older. And so most of our participants happen to be 50 or over, and most were women. 18% women, 82% men. And this was interesting. So again, as PAL is just for parents, and Kim talked about the importance of filling that void for parents, but this is such a need in our community that we have this population that is being underserved, and there's no place for them to go. So even grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, they are going to PAL for help, for support. So that means that you as students, as you graduate and move into the world, look at this, try to help support this underserved group. We want to find out the drug that most of the addicts used. Any surprises here? Alcohol, Kim talked about that. And with what's going on right now, heroin and opioids. Now, opioids are just synthetic heroin. So, as we know, when people can't get a hold of their prescription pain medication, narcotic pain medication, they're switching to heroin. So it was no surprise that these were the top substances. But also, it's a variety. They're not picking just one drug and sticking with it. It's a variety of drugs. So it's not like you could have a treatment program or a program that just targets just one thing. They're mixing a lot of different things. We want to find out the people who participated in this survey, are they actively going to PAL or not? Find out that most of them are still active. And this is important for the next one. Most of them are going for over a year. They've been participating. This is a solid base. So it's the members are engaged, they are participating in PAL, and it is serving a need. Otherwise, they'd go one time and they'd call it a day. But PAL is helping. They are reaching people. And most of them attend PAL on a weekly basis, or 55%. And then we saw the 20% of people who no longer attend PAL meetings. So we wanted to find out why. Obviously to give some feedback to PAL, or maybe we're missing something. Number one, PAL provided me with the tools to help myself, so I no longer feel the need to attend PAL meetings. 40%. Those are 40% of those people who never would have been helped if it wasn't for PAL. Then we look at the bottom where it was 45% for other. So we had a fill in the blank. So for other, what are they going to put? And if you look at the bottom, some people just answered that question twice. So they said they were still attending. So we take that out. I want you to look at number one and number two. Loved one overdosed or died, or loved one found sobriety. There really wasn't any correlation that one thing led to the other. Addiction is heart-wrenching. As Kim talked about in his presentation, that he deals with death all the time, but people who are overdosing. It is a reality of this. So whatever support we can give to parents to help them with this horrible situation, is amazing, is wonderful, is good for the community and good for everyone. We wanted to find out if there was one specific piece of PAL that happened to stand out. It's peer-to-peer support. They have videos, they have guest speakers, non-judgmental environment, things like that. And there was not one thing that came out. So it shows that people are getting something out of all the different parts of PAL, which means there's nothing that I can go back to Kim and say, you really should change this, emphasize X over Y. It's all working. Significant number of people are getting something out of all the different facets of PAL. Again, goes back to supporting the curriculum, supporting the program. Now here's the nuts and bolts. So member well-being and strategies to help support their loved one and to kick their addiction, right? Stopping codependency and enabling, and then physical and mental health. So the survey was divided up into several different questions. Likert scale 1 to 4. This is what we're looking for in these numbers. 3 to 4. Agree or strongly disagree. This is not pre-post. All this is asking members to evaluate their own feelings. Did PAL do X on these different areas? So it's very straightforward. It was a very short survey for people to complete, which was good. Did they understand the programs associated with enabling? Ability to stop enabling. Understand problems associated with codependency, setting firm boundaries, support addicted loved ones' recovery, and then improvement in members' physical and mental health. Every single one out of all those respondents, okay, look at all those people, we look at the average for all those respondents, and look at that. 3.62, 3.27, 3.64, and so forth. So with this group, this sample, PAL is doing what it says it's able to do. It is reaching people. It is helping their mental and physical health. It is helping them with strategies to stop their addicted loved one's addiction. So then what's next? So we have this sample. Pretty significant number, right? Good number. But again, my students in the class, if we design a survey that says, did your mental health improve? Is that the most scientifically significant survey? No. Again, this is incremental. We've been doing this for a year and a half. Start with a very small sample size with qualitative interviews, get some data, try to support it, and keep building and building and building and building and building and building. Every checkbox, everything, we've had three different entire studies now. Every single one is supported PAL. It's great news. So now we're going to get more scientific. Now we're going to look at actual, some very valid and reliable instruments that are measuring well-being, measuring depression, and so forth. And then we're going to pre-post it. So when a member comes in, we're going to give them the pre-test, and we want to follow them incrementally over a period of time. We want to be able to give the richest data back to PAL so they can develop the best program possible to help the community. What they're doing right now is working. Let's help them make it even better. I cannot thank Kim and Michelle enough for everything they're doing for the community. It is honestly a privilege to be a part of it. To do anything that's going to help people and serve this need. And again, I mean, I have family members who are suffering just like a lot of you out there with family members who are facing addiction. So thank you to PAL, thank you to Michelle, and thank you all for everything you're doing in your field.
Thank you so much. I sometimes reflect back, and every once in a while I have to do a little true confession. So I'll give you a little true confession about maybe a little stereotypical true confession about being a cop. Used to drive around on the streets, and I will tell you that if I saw somebody standing on a corner and they looked like they were strung out, you want to know what went through my head? Need to go to jail. No need for these people on the street. Need to just put them away and get rid of them because they're worthless to the society. Can I be honest with you? Can I say that that's what went through my head? Is that awful? Am I a horrible human being? Because I used to think that as I drove around and I'd see these people and I'd get annoyed because they'd step out in traffic, and I'd get annoyed at them because I figured they could just stop making these stupid choices in their life and they'd just go out and get their act together and get a job and do like I did and everybody else should do. Well, let me tell you something. When this started happening in my family, maybe that's why it happened, because maybe I needed to learn something. Maybe I needed to learn something about being judgmental. Maybe I needed to learn something about how I looked at other people and their circumstances. And I thought I was a pretty nice person. I thought I was a pretty kind person. But I am telling you, when I saw people in that condition, I didn't see any point. I didn't see anything that was going to help. All I saw was jail. And now that I think about it, and I realize that that's what went through my head, the first thing when I saw that is like, wow, did I need to learn a lesson? Because I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think that anymore. When I drive down the street and I see somebody standing on a corner, and I see somebody standing there trying to, get something from people, and they're strung out and all of that, you want to know what the first thing that goes through my brain is now? That's somebody's son. That's somebody's daughter. Somebody is probably worried sick and praying and praying and praying that they'll get better and they'll come back to them. Because they won't believe for 1 minute that that beautiful child that they raised ended up in that situation. And I had to learn that lesson. Because it was tough, because it's hard, because I know there's a stereotype about a lot of things out there, and that's why most of the people in jail are in there because of drug-related crimes. Is because our society is not happy with that, and neither am I. Consequences should happen for people that commit crimes. That is a truth. I'm not going to sit here and say you shouldn't get in trouble if you steal people's stuff or anything else. No, that's what should happen. But there's a difference between separating the crime from the person. And the reality is when you're dealing with somebody who's on drugs, and particularly when they're on these kinds of drugs that they're on today, asking them to stop taking drugs is like asking them to stop breathing. Think about shoving somebody underwater and holding them underwater. And in their minds, the air that they're trying to get is the drug they're trying to get. What would you do? What would you do to get it? How hard would you fight? What extent would you go to get something that you think is like air to you? And then you start to understand how incredibly strong these drugs affect people's brains. And so when my son started committing crimes, it was devastating to me. When they started ending up on the street and in the hospital over and over, and if I were to go into the stories, it would take me a half an hour to just list all of the different hospital stays. From getting abscesses from shooting heroin to the point where they were going to amputate his arm at one point. And I found out about it because I didn't even know where he was, and I got a call, and by the time I got there, I get to the hospital and he's not there. And I'm like, but I thought he had to have these antibiotics and it had to be IV, and they said he did. And we just got him on him. We walked out of the room, he ripped the IV out and he's gone. I found him in the parking lot, walking around with no shoes on, his feet all bloody. Didn't even know where he was, didn't even know what was going on, blood pouring out of his arm. I tried to take him somewhere, he wouldn't go. I begged him to go somewhere, he wouldn't go. I can't tell you, every time this happened, it would be like, this makes no sense to me. Well, that's when you start to understand drugs. It makes no sense. And what they will do makes no sense. And it's because they don't know what they're doing. Half the time they're completely driven by something that is beyond their capability of handling. And that's why they have to get help. And that's why their families need to be there for them. And that's why I don't want to abandon them. And that's why I want to help other parents to find what we found, which was a way to get out of being in the depressive states that we were in. My wife and I got to the point where we didn't go anywhere. We didn't do anything. We lived in our house and we closed the door and we went to bed. And all I wanted to do was get in bed at night and close my eyes and hope that maybe if I woke up, everything would change. And it didn't. Year after year, not day after day, year after year. It was 9 years before our older son even remotely decided he was going to even consider going in to do any kind of treatment. And then it was even longer, because then it didn't even work, because it wasn't his idea, because we tried to shove him through the door of the place and he didn't want to go. And we didn't know how to deal with it, and we didn't know what to do, because frankly, we didn't sign up to do that. We didn't know that that's what would happen. We assumed that we followed the recipe. And the recipe was you do all these things with your kids, and you're good to your kids, and you raise your kids in a great home, and this all happens. That doesn't make any sense, because what's supposed to happen is they're supposed to be perfect. And all that's supposed to happen. And the reason I tell you that is not to make you feel bad if somebody in your family is divorced or somebody in your family had a trauma, or somebody in your family was molested and they ended up on drugs. What I'm telling you is it doesn't matter. It doesn't take that to cause the problem. It could be anybody in any family, anywhere. And that's what I had to learn. And I just sat there and I can't tell you. I read to you what my wife wrote. It was so bad that we didn't know what to do. And I'm going to tell you one of the first things that they said to us at a PAL meeting, and you're probably going to be saying to yourself, this is what they tell you to do? And this is what they told us to do. I get it, you guys are totally depressed. I get it, you don't even know if your sons are going to live. You know what you guys need to do? No, what? Go on vacation. Well, that's ridiculous. We're not going anywhere. We wouldn't even have any fun. What if something happens? The phone rings, we got to be there. We're going to go to the hospital. Nope, turn off your phone, go on vacation. And you know what? If you have to, fake it that you're going to have fun. And the reason is you've got to figure out how to separate from this drama, this trauma, all the stuff that's going on. You've got to get better, because if you're not better, if you don't have the emotional strength and the health to get better, then how in the world can you expect that from your sons? Because they're looking at you. As a parent, you will always be a role model. You will always be somebody they look up to. And you know what? If all they see when you have a problem is that you can't handle it and that you just completely fall apart when you have a problem, well, guess what you just did? You just gave them another reason to use drugs, because now they're sitting there looking there and going, they ruined your life. And you're making it real clear to them that they did ruin your life. And I'm like, I do not want to do that. I do not want my sons to carry the burden of thinking that they ruined my life. I could say it a different way now. I might allow them to ruin my life. I might allow that to happen, but I don't have to. And that's what people in the meeting started to say. You don't have to allow that to happen. You can love your children, you can love your sons, and you can go on vacation and have a good time. And the first time we tried it, we came back with it. We got literally, I'm not kidding, we checked into a hotel. We went up to Flagstaff. We checked into a hotel. We sat down. We were there for about 2 hours, got up, checked out of the hotel, and drove home. And said that we can't do that. Went back to our meeting and we told them we didn't do it. And you know what they said? That's okay, do it next week. Try it again. Keep trying. And eventually, I want to share with you one more thing that my wife wrote in this journal. It was on our 28th anniversary, so this would be 7 years ago, a little over 7 years ago. And we were it was bad. We hadn't seen our son in months. We didn't even know where he was. He was literally, our older son was literally living in the bushes in parks. And we couldn't find him. We didn't know where he was. The younger one, we kind of had sightings of him every once in a while, but he didn't have anything to do with this. He wouldn't even speak to us. And I remember we used to think about it, and we'd talk and we'd go, you know, we just had these visions of dreams of them going to college, and we had a college fund and we saved for it, and all I wanted them to do was be happy and to go do something that they would enjoy with their lives. And then all I could see was not only did they not do it, but, you know, what are our lives going to be like without them in our lives? And what's it going to be like if we never see the things that we were hoping we would, our dreams? And so we decided to go on this vacation again, and we really decided, they pushed us, and so we were going to go to California, because we figured that way it would sort of be really hard for us just to turn around and come back. So we got in the car, and actually my wife rented a car. It was kind of fun. So she rented this car, and she said, let's go, we're going to try and have fun. So we rented a Camaro, and so we drove this Camaro all the way over to California, and it was like, I'll do anything to try and get you to smile. And we stayed at this beautiful place, and they had a beautiful swimming pool, and we just, you know, we're gonna like, okay, we're just gonna relax and all that. And my wife wrote this in her journal that day, so it's actually on my birthday. She says, we came back to the hotel, we took a short nap, and then we went to the jacuzzi, and now we're sitting by the pool. We just ordered some snacks, and I have to say that life is good right now. Both of us are doing a lot of reading, and we're working on ourselves rather than trying to control or fix our sons. I am watching a young man and his daughter, around 5 years old, play in the pool. And am I imagining one day that I might have a little granddaughter of my own? I'm doing everything to reframe my picture of my boys in my mind, because they're no longer boys, they're adult men. And I have to learn how to envision them that way. And it was funny because she said something to me while we were by the pool. She looked at me and she said, Kim, do you think we will ever have grandkids? And I said, I don't know. I said, I just hope our kids live. And I was like in a state of just disbelief that this could happen to somebody's life. But let me tell you, a lot of things have happened since then. If you didn't happen to pick up the December issue of Money Magazine, that's us. And they featured us in this article to talk about this issue of how the cost of this opioid crisis. But I told them I wouldn't do the article unless they talked about the hope of what PAL brings. And the reporter promised me, and they did. And PAL got more traction out of the fact that this went out around the country than anything else we had ever done. And now it's just the information and the people coming to us wanting to start meetings is just blowing up. And we're trying to meet this need, and we're working on fundraising, and we're working on growing into a strategic plan where we can make this happen so that we can meet this need all around. And I'm dealing right now with a woman in Australia who wants to start a meeting there, and there's several couples in Canada that want to start meetings in Canada, and there's all these other people, because this is everywhere. It's not just the United States, it's all over the world. And the reality is it's not going to get better anytime soon. It's been around since the dawn of time, and it's going to continue to be a problem. And if it's not the opioids today, it'll be something else. By the way, if you didn't know this, the biggest drug problem right now that's coming out of Mexico is meth. It's come back. The opioid thing, even though it continues, is actually not the biggest drug problem that they're dealing with right now. And so it's just continuing. It'll cycle. It'll be other things. And so PAL's mission is to provide hope through education and support. We want to be there for families. We want to be there for parents. We want to be there to make those meetings available for people everywhere they are. And so what happened? Well, it got to the point where we really couldn't have contact with our sons because it was devastating us. It was to the point where if we saw them, we were in such a depressive state we couldn't deal with it. And eventually we had to just say no, we couldn't do that anymore. And so our older son in particular, was the first one, and he ended up in the hospital multiple times, but this time he ended up in there. He was really sick, and he was in there over Christmas, and at that point, they called us, and they said, hey, your son's in the hospital, and we were literally packing up our car. We were getting ready to leave town, and interestingly enough, we had done this the year before. The exact same thing the year before at Christmas time. Literally, we're packing up our car, we're getting ready to go, and the phone rings, and he was in the hospital the year before. And we just unpacked, we went and sat in the hospital for almost 10, 11, 12 days while he promised us he was going to get better, and then of course checked out of the hospital and immediately went and did drugs. And now it's a year later, and here we are, we're doing the exact same thing again. We're packing up. I am not exaggerating. That phone rings, and it's this hospital, and they are telling us that he's in the hospital, and he's in really bad shape, and that he wants to see us. And I said, you think he's going to die? And this nurse is like, what kind of question is that? I said, do you think he's going to die? And she goes, I don't know. He's in bad shape. I said, well, is there somebody there that can answer that question? And she says, well, you guess, the doctor's here in the room. I said, well, then let me talk to him. He gets on the phone. I ask him. He thinks I'm crazy too. He's like, why are you asking me that? I go, I just want to know, do you think my son is going to die? And he goes, well, we're going to do everything we can. So I guess if you want to answer the question, I think he's going to live. I think we're going to be able to take care of what this is. I said, thank you very much. Tell our son that we love him and we're going on vacation. Now let me explain something to you. If I started off this whole entire conversation today and told you that that's how I treated my sons, do you think that's a loving and kind thing to do? Or not? But if you didn't know what had happened for the first 12 years, the last 12 years of dealing with him, then you wouldn't know that what happened next was him sitting there in that hospital bed when that doctor told him that, and a few days later saying to himself, I don't want to live this way anymore. I've got to change. And we were on vacation. And I'll never forget, we came back and we just kept praying the whole time. I hope he does something. I hope he gets in and does something right. And the next thing you know, it was about a week later, we got a phone call. He was in a treatment center. He had taken himself there. And then he had checked himself in from there. He went from a 30-day program. He went into another program. He went into one that took almost a year. We didn't set it up. We didn't call him. We didn't do anything. He did it himself. And then the next thing you know, he gave us a call and he had met somebody, been sober for a long time. In the meantime, he had tracked down his brother. He had talked his brother into going into treatment. He had gotten into treatment. And so here they are a few months ago. Our older son is over on the right. That's him and his fiancée. That's our younger son on the left. And the reality is that that's been almost 5 years ago. He's an IT professional. He has a great job in the treatment world. He helps people. He does too. He actually does it part-time because he can't stand not being around it and helping. And she's been a part of that as well. And the most important thing is that we have a new little friend in our life. And unfortunately, she was born with a heart defect, and she's had to have 2 major open heart surgeries, and she's just a little trooper, but she's doing really well right now, and she's my little 3-year-old best buddy. And we like hanging out together, we like hiking together, we like doing lots of stuff together. Come on, somebody's got an awe on that one, right? This is her about 3 weeks ago. And the best part of this picture is she's on her way to a church daughter-daddy dance. And that's her dad holding her hand, and he's off taking her to the dance. She talked about it for about 3 or 4 days, about how much fun she had. And the reality is that I don't know that this would have happened, and my son will tell you that this would never have happened if it wasn't for the fact that we made some changes in our life. And those changes in our life and what we learned at PAL motivated him to make the changes he did in his life. And our younger son actually tells the same story.